Good afternoon and welcome to today's Todos Medical Webcast as part of the Planet MicroCap Showcase. It is now my pleasure to turn the floor over to your host, Gerald Conacion of Todos Medical. Please go ahead.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you everyone who's listening to this presentation. Todos Medical is a medical diagnostics company focused on the development of different solutions for diagnostic tests in cancer and Alzheimer's. And we, through the course of the pandemic, got involved in COVID-19 testing and recently in the development of novel solutions to address antiviral shortage for COVID-19. Moving to slide 2, this is just our safe harbor statement. So the company is headed by a group of seasoned executives with experience both in large companies as well as in startups. We have, as part of the team, Dr. Jorge Leon, who's our Chief Medical Advisor for Oncology and Infectious Disease. He's worked closely with us to help us build up our COVID-19 testing portfolio and is being very helpful in terms of our strategy and the deployment of how we are moving forward our breast cancer assays. We also have Dr. Paula Trapaz, who is a Chief Medical Officer for us at Todos. She is a former executive at Eli Lilly who helped us bring the Amyvid diagnostic test to market for them and is very excited about our LimPro Alzheimer's blood test. And we also have Dr. Elise Brownell, who's our VP of Research and Development, who has been working to bring all of these different technologies into a streamlined program that are making diligent progress in terms of getting into the marketplace. So we have spent at Todos most of our time talking over the last several months about our COVID diagnostic testing business and the distribution of different reagents and supplies for COVID. But as we start to make progress, as a society on COVID, we want to make sure that we don't distract from the fundamentals of the company. We're really, at our core, we're focused on next generation blood-based tests for cancer and Alzheimer's. We view this as a significant opportunity because of the lack of effective diagnostics in these areas, especially in the area of breast cancer. And so we have focused really on looking at the immune system in breast cancer and identifying ways for us to differentiate and pick out people who are likely have cancer from those who do not. And so, the low risk people who likely do not have cancer, obviously there's one protocol, and people, who do have cancer, likely do have breast cancer, are moved into a diagnostic paradigm that is more stringent, that follows the standard of care. And the idea here is that we know that, especially in breast cancer, there is a significant lack of good tools being used, especially with mammogram. Mammogram has issues as it relates to diagnostic accuracy. There's also, from a physiological perspective, a large percentage of women who just don't respond well to mammograms, i.e. their physiology is such that mammograms cannot pick up potential lesions or differentiate those lesions from healthy tissue because there's not enough vasculature in the breast for that to occur. And as a result, there's a lot of unneeded diagnostics and ultimately biopsies that are performed to ensure that a woman does not have breast cancer. And so the tests that we're developing are really targeted at this, very critical problem in something called BI-RADS3 and BI-RADS4, where an inconclusive mammogram, the large percentage of the time, leads women to do significant and expensive diagnostic testing and ultimately an invasive biopsy that ends up being negative. And so for women who have dense breasts, this becomes a major issue because it's recurring on an ongoing basis. So for us, as we look at the development of our portfolio, we have 2 tests that target this breast cancer problem. We have the Videssa breast cancer test, which is really a rule-out test that has been commercialized here in the U.S., and we are acquiring it as part of an acquisition of Provista Diagnostics that we're at the tail end of completing. This test is focused on the identification of tumor-associated antibodies and serum protein markers to effectively tell you if you do not have cancer. So we have a defined algorithm that looks at these markers, and in the absence of these markers, there's a 98% plus likelihood that you do not have breast cancer. However, if that test is positive, it doesn't necessarily mean that you do have breast cancer, but it means that we're picking up certain antibodies that are associated with tumors, and therefore, that becomes something that should be looked at more closely, whether for breast or other cancers. That is a standard assay using an ELISA method that can be deployed relatively rapidly in the market, and we are looking to bring that into the market by the end of 2021. We also have, as part of Todos's proprietary platform, TBIA, which stands for Todos Biochemical Infrared Analysis, a technology that uses spectroscopy to turn biological data into information and then develop algorithms using artificial intelligence to identify and differentiate patients who have cancer and the tissue of origin of that cancer versus patients who do not. And our strategy with this very unique technology that is highly scalable, because the same sample is able to look for breast cancer, colon cancer, lung cancer, pancreatic cancer. Our strategy with this TMB-1 and TMB-2 blood tests from our TBIA platform are to piggyback its development, which is AI-based, and so the more inputs that we bring in, the more sensitive and specific the assay will become. In order to do that, we need to generate significant sample volume to train those algorithms. Right now we have approximately 500 subjects on which this has been trained, and we've seen some promising results. But for U.S. regulators, they'd like to see anywhere between 2,000 and 10,000 subjects based on the use case. We intend to leverage the Videssa breast cancer test, which is commercial ready now, to begin generating revenue and generating sample volume, and then use the data and the samples from Videssa to train the TBIA platform. So this piggybacking strategy, we think, will accelerate the infrared analysis platform to market. Ultimately, we may combine, to a certain extent, the TMB platform and the Videssa platform to create, a truly innovative, highly sensitive, and specific blood test. And then finally, we have, beyond the breast cancer and colon cancer platform using the TBIA, which was also expanded into colorectal cancer, although that's early days. We have a blood test for Alzheimer's disease that, again, is centered on the immune system, looking for very similar mechanisms that we see in cancer. We also see in Alzheimer's. So we view Alzheimer's as cancer of cells that are unable to replicate. And biologically, we see some very similar targets and mechanisms within cancer and Alzheimer's. And because of this biology, we believe we can ultimately train our TBIA platform, again, by piggybacking on the sample volume created from the Linpro test, which is relatively close to commercialization, to be able to train the TBIA platform to ultimately pick up Alzheimer's disease. And so TBIA down the line is expected to become a single test that will be able to identify multiple immune-related diseases, because what it's really able to do is, develop what we call a fingerprint of the immune system. So this TBIA cancer screening platform is able to look at different cancers and how they influence the immune system differently. The same method with different algorithms can detect different cancers, and ultimately we think it can also detect Alzheimer's disease. And so the reason why, Todos was created and why we're really centered on discussing this TBIA platform is because this could be a single blood test that is able to identify all cancers and identify different immune-based problems, diagnose them, Alzheimer's or others, with a single test. So it becomes highly scalable in terms of multiplexing multiple assays on the same test article for as a general screen. And this fingerprint, whether in breast cancer, as you see here, or in colon cancer, as you see on the bottom, on the right-hand side, ultimately plays itself out through this Todos Biochemical Infrared Analysis platform, so that we can see many, many different types of diseases, whether positive or negative, using that same test article. So that's really, really unique. Getting back to what we think is going to be commercial ready, with Videssa, the market opportunity as it relates to the diagnostic challenges with breast cancer. First, let's talk a little bit about the market. Approximately 30 million women undergo mammography annually in the United States. It is hypothesized that up to 50% of those women actually have dense breast. And dense breast is, as I mentioned before, a situation where the vasculature of the breast is such that you cannot capture an image and really define whether something is a lesion or whether something is just mass that as part of the normal breast tissue. This is such an important problem that 32 states have passed legislation that instructs providers that they must inform a patient of their breast density. And the reason why this is so important is because this becomes a cash cow for providers who do a mammogram. They know because the patient has a history of inconclusive mammograms, likely as a result of dense breast, that the patient will come for a mammogram, then they'll go down and have a diagnostic mammogram, then they may have an ultrasound or an MRI, and then ultimately leads to a biopsy. So several different procedures from the patient that in turn create significant cost and expense for the system, as well as potentially for the patient with out-of-pocket expenses, all when over 95% of the time it turns out to be negative. So this is one of the really important reasons why Videssa, as part of the Diagnostic Paradigm, or TMB, once it's brought into the market as part of the Diagnostic Paradigm, can really change how you look at it. The decision would be, post an inconclusive mammogram, you could have a blood test that would be very simple. And if that blood test is positive, then you would go through the standard diagnostic paradigm because you would be in the high-risk category. If the blood test is negative, you would be in the low-risk category, and you would do what they call watchful waiting, which is just ongoing monitoring, instruct the patients to do self-assessment, and come in for maybe not a mammogram, but an additional blood test on a more defined timeline, so that they can monitor their solution, their situation. And one of the big challenges that we see in breast cancer that we know is important is that because mammogram does include radiology, and there is exposure to potentially dangerous agents, the age for mammogram has been getting pushed, later and later. So now, according to the guidelines, mammograms are supposed to be conducted above the age of 43. With that in mind, above age 43, what really you have a situation where many women, unless they are at high risk because of family incidents, under the age of 43, really have almost no screening. So that's one market opportunity that we're looking at, and where we have some very good data with the Videssa blood test. Obviously, for dense breast above the age of 43, we get back to this scenario where you have, ongoing, continual, inconclusive mammograms where a blood test could change that diagnostic paradigm. So we've done now studies looking at, suspicious findings in women 25 to 49, women 25 to 75, and obviously including women 50 and over. All of these studies are now complete. They were prospectively followed, and they've been published. And we've been worked with some of the leading investigators in the field, in some of the leading institutions. And the data that has been generated really shows with the Videssa blood test a really exquisite negative predictive value that lends credence that this test really is a very important test that can help OBGYNs and radiologists and others make treatment decisions for their patients. With regards to the number of biopsies that we think we can reduce in that 25 to 75 population, on a combined basis, it's estimated that it's really 67% total of BI-RADS 3, 4, and 5, but where we're more focused is in the BI-RADS 3 and BI-RADS 4, where we believe that we could potentially reduce up to 45.9% of biopsies, which would obviously be quite significant for women in the market. So as we mentioned, breast cancer is really, the bread and butter and the focus of the company from a proprietary perspective. I'm now going to switch gears and get away from talking about our breast cancer portfolio to talk about our diagnostic portfolio focused in COVID testing. And for COVID testing, what we decided to do last year when we got involved in COVID-19 through a molecular lab that was doing cancer testing was to really focus on the workflow, so we can create automated workflows that would allow labs to do large volumes of PCR testing in a relatively short period of time. And with that, we got together with groups that had automation, such as TCAN. We've built out liquid handling robots, and we've created workflows that can get labs to be able to conduct up to 12,000 tests per day using our automated equipment. So with that, as a result of signing up labs who are interested in our workflows, they also agreed to purchase our reagents and materials, and that is where the vast majority of the revenue that Todos has begun generating comes from. We do see SARS-CoV-2 continuing to grow. These numbers, I believe, are quite stagnant. It's at least double this at this point in many parts of the world. Oh no, these were updated. So there's been hundreds of millions of infections, millions of deaths, billions of dollars spent on COVID-19, and trillions of dollars impacted in terms of economic activity. We do anticipate, that we're going to be generating $50+ million in COVID-19 testing and other revenue for 2021 as a result of the PCR automated workflows and some of the other things that we're doing in the COVID-19 testing space. As recently as yesterday, we made a pretty significant announcement with regards to some of the stuff that we've been doing through a partnership we have in Israel with a company called NLC Pharma. So there, we have been funding the development of a novel diagnostic test to look at a new measure of viral load, really something called the 3CL protease. That's what we measured. And then we expanded that partnership with NLC to include a protease inhibitor. And using this protease inhibitor, we could potentially impact the ability of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which is the virus that causes COVID-19, to replicate. We've gotten some very promising results in preclinical studies. We've gotten some tremendous feedback from patients who use this product on a dietary supplement basis. And we also have results from a controlled phase 1B clinical study of 27 patients that we are in the process of preparing for publication or dissemination to the community that outlines the really significant impact that this 3CL protease inhibitor mechanism can have on patient outcomes in COVID-19. So really the partnerships that we've put together around the automated solutions, getting access to the patients, novel technologies for testing the virus as well as inhibiting the virus, as well as contact tracing and data and patient reporting in COVID-19 over the last year have allowed us to build a juggernaut that we see being able to overcome some of the ups and downs in the domestic COVID-19 market, and we are now looking domestically to get into institutional testing directly as well as to our clients, and then internationally to take our proprietary technologies to market. So that's really on the COVID-19 space. That's where we focused a lot of our attention. And then finally, as part of that overall deployment of COVID-19 testing solutions, we did focus on the creation of mobile labs, which can bring a number of these different solutions directly to the areas that really need the testing and the supplements and potentially the antiviral programs directly, where there's a significant amount of testing ongoing. Some of those sites have turned into vaccination sites. So we see testing and vaccination going hand in hand. And we think that with the emergence of variants, that antivirals are becoming important to limit the ability of this virus to continue to mutate in a way that could overcome vaccine efficacy. So with that, I do want to open up the floor to some questions. So I'm going to the Q&A, and I am asking questions here. So the cost, I believe this is related to the Videssa assay. We expect, and we haven't gone out there with pricing, but that the cost of the test for the Videssa assay will be under $1,000. So we think that it'll be well south of $1,000, and we expect that we will be able to get this out to the market initially as a laboratory developed test through Provista Diagnostics. How much does a biopsy cost? A biopsy, the whole chain of events following an inconclusive mammogram costs about $6,000. And so on average, if you can get 45% of that downstream diagnostic paradigm reduced as a result of the blood test, the pharmacoeconomics of that are really compelling. And so one of the things that we've done with regards to looking at what the value of our test would be is we are going to be conducting a clinical utility study to really pin down the numbers so we can get a unique CPT code. So we just raised the last question. I believe I have time to take today, although I may have time for one more. How much cash do you have, and what is your share structure? So in terms of cash, so we just raised another $3 million last week. So we haven't publicly disclosed what our cash position is, but it's north of that. And in terms of what our share structure is, we substantially cleaned up the share structure since the beginning of 2021. We've reduced discount to market convertible debt by north of $4 million at this point. And we consolidated it into the hands of a single family office investor. And that family office investor just invested in the crossover round that was led by a venture capital firm called Yozma and opened in January of 2021. So we raised in January 2021 $3.4 million as the opening of that crossover round. Last week we added $3 million from this family office investor who was able to help us really clean up the debt and put it into a stable situation so that we now believe we can really drastically reduce the dilution that has resulted as a result of those previous instruments and position the company to be able to move towards a listing on a national exchange at some point later in 2021, hopefully by the end of the first half of 2021. So with that, I don't see any more questions from the audience. So I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to listen to this presentation. And we will be updating it here very shortly, given some of the very significant events that are going on with the company. And we will get a new corporate presentation out to the market so that investors can look at that in the very near future. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to seeing some of you again at future presentations.